It isn't any one thing. It all added up that now that Democratic Party is seen more as a party of the elites, and the Republican Party has successfully sold itself to everyday working people. And so I think that message is resoundingly clear. And so in this world, it's kind of ironic that it's the Republicans now that are pushing a fair access regime, and the Democrats that were basically allowing cover for this sort of shame-based shadow regulatory system. And so what we would like is that the regulators, whether it's the OCC, the FDIC, or the Fed, or the SEC, or any other regulator, knock it off if it isn't actually real risk as opposed to just projected risk. It should be banked, and it should be banked with appropriate controls. We did kind of a baby soft launch. I mean, the ultimate USBC, we hope it will be a deposit token issued directly by the banks in our ecosystem without any intermediary. So it's differentiated from a stable coin in that it'll always have identity. It'll have FDIC insurance. It will be able to sit in a non-custodial wallet directly.
Let's get right into it. What was your take on the election?
Well, the people have spoken. I think everyone was surprised. The prediction markets were right. The polls were wrong. Overall, the vote count was 10 million less, and 12 million people switched from D to R to vote for Donald Trump. And down ballot tickets, along with mine, were kind of a washout as well. So it is a new world. There's no question about election integrity. This time, Mr. Trump thought it was all just fine. First time a Republican has won the popular vote since 2004. I'd have to say that this is a mandate, and it's a wake-up call for the Democratic Party. They're going to have to rethink things. Democrats spent big. They knocked on a lot of doors. They had good candidates, but their message did not resonate. So we're facing a really new world that I think very few people were predicting the night before the election.
Do you have any thoughts on what might have driven that shift for those 10 million people?
Well, 10 million didn't vote, so they just didn't feel engaged by the process, and 12 million switched. And so the messaging of the Democrats, a party that used to speak to working people, that they've lost that sector. They lost it across the board with almost every segment, including Black men and Latinos, as well as they obviously lost a big part of the tech community and the crypto community in particular. But it isn't any one thing. It all added up that now that Democratic Party is seen more as a party of the elites, and the Republican Party has successfully sold itself to everyday working people. And so I think that message is resoundingly clear.
Well, I think everyone is aware that, the incoming administration is going to have a very different approach on a lot of things. What sort of impact do you see this having on the regulatory environment?
Even though I lost in my campaign, and I had thrown in my lot with the Harris camp, basically saying, even though there's some interests that are served to me by the Republicans and Mr. Trump, but on a values basis, I was voting with Harris. Everything I spent back on the campaign with our crypto portfolio, we made it all back in one day. And that's really because the financial sector, which has been under a lot of shaming pressure under the current administration, which is kind of characterized by the tone of Gary Gensler and Elizabeth Warren. There's celebrations. I mean, it's a new world. And I think we're going to see an end to the administrative state that was based on sort of shaming and regulation by enforcement action. And we're going to get back to the rule of law and fair access, open banking, data-driven decisions. So that's set the markets on a tizzy, including in crypto in particular. So I think we are going to get clarity in regulation, and it's going to be a rules-based order as opposed to a shame-based order. I think this will be the end of Operation Choke Point 2.0. I'm really excited. Obviously, I didn't like the outcome of the election overall, but in our particular sector of the world, this is the clarity that we've been looking for.
And as you mentioned, Trump has clearly taken this pro crypto stance. He's talked about his plans for people like Gary Gensler. But from your perspective, do you have like a regulatory wish list for this new administration?
The wish list is that it's been actually documented in legislation like the Fair Access legislation, whereas historically the definition of unsafe and unsound has included regulators just picking particular industries that they wanted to shame out of existence and debank. In the new regime, safety and soundness will be data driven, which means you can't just demonize whole segments. If it's legal and it's licensed, it's not abusive. It should be banked. Individual customers might be dialed back because they're particularly risky, but it'll be on their merits. And so in this world, it's kind of ironic that it's the Republicans now that are pushing a fair access regime and the Democrats that were basically allowing cover for this sort of shame-based shadow regulatory system. And so what we would like is that the regulators, whether it's the OCC, the FDIC, or the Fed or the SEC or any other regulator, knock it off. If it isn't actually real risk as opposed to just projected risk, it should be banked, and it should be banked with appropriate controls. And so we expect legislation like the Fair Access legislation to come through. We expect crypto legislation to come through, so there's clarity about what banks and other legal and other regulated institutions like money transmitters can and can't do. I think you might have seen that the 18 states are suing Gary Gensler for exceeding his constitutional authority. And so it's going to be a law and order regime. I think folks are going to start to innovate again. They're going to start to look at the US. In addition, Trump has made noises that crypto should be treated like money, which means that capital gains would not apply to returns that you earn when you buy at one price and sell at another. That's a removal of a huge barrier to crypto being used for everyday transactions, because who wants to do tax calculations for buying a cup of coffee? I don't know if that'll go through, but it certainly signals a change in attitude and intent to one that's based on common sense, practicality, as opposed to sort of like moralizing overtones and demonization.
Well, you mentioned the banking regulators, right? The FDIC, the OCC, and this is sort of tangential, but you had shared with me the letter from it was a couple dozen congressmen, including McHenry, who leads the House Financial Services Committee. Do you want to talk a little bit about the contents and significance of that letter?
Yeah, that letter, which was signed by Republicans, was to the heads of the three major regulators over banking, the FDIC, the OCC, and the Fed. And basically, it was a knock it off letter. Like, stop exceeding your authority, start focusing on allowing thoughtful innovation to move forward. Just because something's novel and you haven't seen it before, don't just dismiss it out of hand. And so it's basically a directive to the regulators. And this happened before the election, telling them to stop being basically buttheads about innovation. And look, everybody wants the banking system to be safe and sound, but this construct that if it is new and it isn't something that's like 50 years old, then it's somehow essentially unsafe and unsound. It's ridiculous. It is a Luddite view of technology behind banking. The letter's not about crypto. The letter's about just innovation in general. It's not just about blockchain. It's about any type of innovation. It wants to see the United States return to being a leader rather than a laggard in this field. And it's sad to me that Democrats aren't on board with that. I think some Democrats will get on board with that because the message the people spoke, and this obstructionist view about this sector, it's an untenable position for Democrats to hold going forward. It was untenable before. It's just that we didn't get to election to hear that until last Tuesday.
Just bringing it back to the election for a little bit. Of course, you weren't just watching from afar. This time you were intimately involved with your own congressional campaign. And of course, as sort of your first run at it, I don't think we expected a win. But Do you want to talk a little bit about how that went, the lessons learned, et cetera?
Well, it's always it's always tough to take a butt kicking, and yet, no, we weren't expecting to win. We did get incredible brand recognition and name recognition, but look, I'm running in a district that has 3 Republicans for every 2 Democrats. I ran as a nonpartisan. There was no Democrat in the race, and so some of the Republicans called me a closet Democrat, even though I've never registered as a Democrat before. But look, we ran about 10 points behind where we expected to be, but so did the whole ticket, and including Jackie Rosen was running for senator. She won overall, but in my district, she was basically 10 points behind, and Harris was even worse. And so we had great media campaign. We had knocked on a lot of doors, but really, look, anything that's associated with the last 4-year administration, not that I was part of that, but it was close enough to it that, we're not on the winning side. In my district, it's really hard to imagine how to win a district that's plus 12 Republican unless you're going to win it in the primary. So we'll have to have a rethink next time around. There's a bunch of things we can do in the state that I'll continue to work on that got a lot of recognition, things like a permanent fund, a bond issuance to do affordable housing, banking legislation for payments banks. That all got recognition. We're going to move forward with that. The choice issue got decided affirmatively. That's good news too. But things like ranked choice voting and open primaries, that didn't make it. The parties were against it, both parties, and that went down to defeat in Nevada. And so basically I have to take stock of all that. Really proud of the campaign we ran, but going to have to recognize that the whole country, and in particular my district, have moved quite right. And look, I'm conservative on the money stuff. And look, we moved right, but we did pass strong protections for women's rights and women's healthcare issues. But in terms of trust about who's going to be better at running the government on economic policies, unless you're very closely aligned with the Republican agenda right now, it's tough to get a word in edgewise. We'll see in 2 years, but usually there's a circle back to the party that's out of power. But we'll see, because there weren't many. Let's just say there weren't many Harris signs, outside of the Reno city limits, and even in Reno, the race was really, really tight and tough. And the Republicans basically won even in Reno.
Well, you mentioned 2 years from now. Are there concrete plans for the midterms? And obviously, Trump won't be on the ballot this time.
Trump won't be on the ballot, but in my state of Nevada, the battle lines are pretty clearly drawn. I'll have to have a rethink on the strategy. But the Democrats just overall, they did not retake the House. I thought for sure they would retake the House. We'll see what the Democrats come up with. But even though they raised more money, they knocked on more doors. They had arguably good candidates. They don't have the ear of the American people, and haven't yet seen a process that suggests that's going to get sorted out. So 2026 is a bit of a question mark. I'll have to figure out how I run. I will be involved in political issues one way or the other. I'll have to figure out what to do as a campaign strategy. But I did have a tremendous time and have now been really thrust in and met people both on the R and the D side of the aisle that really are generally working on these issues. But the old guard in the regulatory environment, they're going to be out the door. Hasn't happened yet, but I don't think anybody has any illusions that the memo's out and there's a new team coming in.
Well, congrats on the campaign anyways. And, on the bright side, everyone in Nevada pretty much knows who Greg Kidd is these days.
Yeah, even little kids seem to reckon they like those ads and stuff, but of course they don't vote.
Finally, we did have the successful launch of USBC, which is a licensed US dollar stablecoin issued by Universal Ledger. It's also supported by a slew of hard Yaka ecosystem companies, including, Omnumi, Uphold, Global ID. Do you want to talk about that launch a little bit?
Sure. We did kind of a baby soft launch. The ultimate USBC, we hope it will be a deposit token issued directly by the banks in our ecosystem without any intermediary. So it's differentiated from a stable coin in that it'll always have identity. It'll have FDIC insurance. It will be able to sit in a non-custodial wallet directly. This soft launch is kind of still as a stable coin, and it's done through a custodial wallet, Uphold. And so it's just a way for us to kind of get some coin out there circulating. And so stay tuned for the fuller launch when we do this as a full-on deposit token. We think stablecoins are great. We think there'll be stablecoin legislation, but at the end of the day, stablecoins can spend part of their life in a non-custodial wallet without identity. That's going to create all sorts of compliance issues and headaches. We're looking to create an alternative that's compliant always, a completely green ecosystem that's also FDIC insured and capital efficient. And so 2025 is going to be all about that launch. And we'll let the market decide what proportion of dollar funds want to be held as stable coins in sort of a gray market versus would actually be better served in a green market with identity, fully compliant as a deposit token. So that's what I'll be working on in 2025. That's what the ecosystem will be working on. I'm really just happy that the first USBC got out the door last week. Thanks to all.
It's a super exciting vision. And I will say the stablecoin itself will have some exciting announcements in the coming weeks as well. So please stay tuned for that.